I cried with my whole heart, hear me. O Lord, I will keep thy statutes. I cried unto thee, save me, and I shall keep thy testimonies. I prevented the dawning of the morning. I cried, I hoped in thy word. Mine eyes prevent.
Good morning. Welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. My name is Paul Strangini. Where we left off, Jesus was talking about how it was better to enter into life halt and than to go into life with a full plate of members that cause thee to offend, because in the kingdom of God all things that offend which do iniquity are to be removed. Therefore, if we are still attached to iniquitous things, we risk our own selves being removed completely, permanently, and burned up in everlasting fire. So, and that had all arisen from the question, who shall be the greatest in the kingdom? Asked by his disciples, and Jesus has taken a little child and said, except you humble yourself as a little child. And define them in verse 6 is one of these little ones which believe in me. A lot of times people get confused about these verses and they talk about having childlike faith. But that is not really what it says. It says you must humble yourself as a child. But also that they must be believing. Children can be as skeptical as anyone, though I suppose, like I said, the youngest child looks on the world with wonderment and amazement. And I remember watching my 2-year-old see someone perform magic tricks, and he was amazed. You know, he thought that, I don't know what he thought because he can't talk, but he was definitely, his eyes got big and he was excited. Whereas a 5-year-old in the same situation, and there was a 5-year-old in the same situation, was immediately skeptical, wondering. And there is a humility in belief. But it is not saying you must believe as a child, though you must believe. I mean, he said you must have faith as a grain of mustard seed. When we talked about the odd sort of interplay between belief and unbelief, and that, you know, there are degrees of certainty. You know, that is sort of how faith is measured. You know, like we say, you know, you have a certain amount of confidence, like a percentage, you could maybe quantify it. They do this often with like weather reports. 80% chance of rain. You know, and when there's an 80% chance of rain and it doesn't rain, you're kind of surprised because you think like, well, 80%. And when it says 20% chance of rain, you go out and you think, well, it probably won't rain. Faith can be measured on that sliding scale, but well, you know, in a sense, you don't have if you don't have absolute faith, that means there's some amount of doubt. And that was the kind of faith Jesus said was required to move mountains. It also suggested in a way that that's the kind of faith that's required to, you know, to cast out the most difficult demons, so to speak. In verse 10 he says, take heed that ye despise not one of these little ones, for I say unto you that in heaven their angels do always behold the face of my Father which is in heaven. I always thought this is an interesting verse. You know, since I was a kid, I was told this. People repeat this often. That, and it can be portrayed in many ways, but I mean, sometimes I hear it said like this, that every child has an angel. This is the guardian angel verse. The guardian angel. But there's something. Take heed that ye despise not one of these little ones. Despise. Interesting choice of words. Not cause to offend. Remember, if someone causes them to offend, it would be better that a millstone was hanged about their neck. But this is more, or less specific in terms of, consequences. Cataphroneo. To think little of. To have a low opinion of. Who are the little ones? Now, he says little ones, but it's like, and he has a child. Is it really referring to children? Jacob have I loved, Esau have I hated. I don't think this is about guardian angels. An angel in the Greek, it means a messenger, and it means so in the Old Testament too. Also, angels are messengers. The word means, the word angelos in Greek, from which we get evangelism and such, it means to carry a message, a messenger. In heaven, there are angels, they're messengers, do always behold the face of my Father. What does it mean to behold someone's face? They have the face of God. They can see him. And that's an interesting idiom, because from Scripture you may know that no man has seen God at any time. And even Moses, when God showed himself to Moses, he showed him his hinder parts. So he could sort of like see him as he goes by, but not look him square in the face. Because it was believed that if he looked upon God, he would die. I think of it more in terms of that the man cannot comprehend God and truly see him in as he is. You can see manifestations of God, like the Holy Spirit appeared as a dove. You could look at Jesus, a man. And God the Father could certainly take on forms where we would see something that was him, but we wouldn't be looking to the essence of him. But it is not so of the angels. They can look God full in the face and no harm. They're angels. That means they're messengers. And I'm not sure how to characterize that. It's like when I pray to God. But I think that he's speaking somewhat metaphorically here. That he's not saying, because it's like, it's too, here's the thing. To derive a sort of guardian angel's doctrine from this verse is quite a big leap. You just get one verse and then you pull out of your hat an idea that every child on the earth has an angel that watches over them. I mean, not only is that somewhat complex and problematic, it's also kind of fairy tale. Yeah, I mean, bad things happen to children, and God knows about it. He doesn't need an angel to go tell him. He doesn't need an angel to run and say, "Oh, the child was kidnapped." And there God is on the throne. Oh, is that so? Well, tell me where the body is, so in the resurrection I can go fetch it. So, I don't know. I've never been a big fan of the guardian angels doctrine, the idea that there is a literal angel sort of watching over you. It's comforting as a child. I've never told my children that. Maybe it's a Catholic thing, because this is the verse, guardian angels, over the believing children, I suppose, right? And yeah, but that's not really what it even says. It says, don't look down on the humble little ones who are like children and who believe in me. The least of these, my brethren, so to speak. In the church, we should not despise the little, the small, or as it is often put, the stupid, the ignorant, the uneducated, but people do. And I see it among Christians, certainly from who come from the same background I do. And Arnold Murray, he was my original teacher, and one of the things he used to say is, God's people are a little bit stupid. They're ignorant. And I thought, in a sense, he despised that, and that's wrong. I know he despised it, or at least it rubs off on his disciples, because, they'll tell me I'm stupid, ignorant, etc., and very unkindly attempt to abuse me. Not that it works, really. I mean, it doesn't have the effect they desire of getting me to feel bad. No one's ever succeeded in making me feel bad by calling me stupid. Even when I make a mistake, that feeling is impenetrable. I never feel stupid. I just made a stupid mistake. That's happened plenty of times. Even the most agile person can trip and fall. And even the smartest can make mistakes. But there are people who are lack ability in the intellectual areas and the ability to process information. I mean, it's just a fact of life. And even smart people, at the front end, when you first become a believer, there's a potential to be despised. Oh, this ignorant person, they don't know what they're doing. They think they're so smart, and maybe you're not acting arrogantly at all. You're just humbly asking questions. I think of that time when my wife, when she was young, probably just before I met her, I don't know exactly when, but how she went to someone who was, who was a son of a pastor studying to be a pastor, and says to him questions after questions. And I forgot what the question was. I don't even know if she remembers what the question was that caused this reaction, but he said, stop taking it so seriously. It's just religion. And then in a sense, it's sort of despising the curiosity of a new convert, or someone who is entering into the kingdom of heaven new, with humility, with curiosity, with the wonder of exploring a new thing, like a child entered into the world, humble in the sense that they know they don't know anything, and they want to know everything. They don't know anything, and they desire to know everything, and they're enthusiastic for the word, and people despise them. But they're angels, behold the face of God. Meaning, I want to think of angels as being like their messenger, their messages, or their questions. This person's got all these questions. And the angel's there saying, we've got questions here. There's an interested party. Somebody wants to know about the kingdom of heaven. Somebody's believed on you and they want more information. They have questions. They have concerns. They have ideas. They want someone to judge them. They want some feedback. They need help from an elder, from an apostle, from a teacher. They want their help and assistance. They need to know what's going on. You know, and God sees this. It's like they're sending messengers to God with all their curiosity, their love, their interest in the Word, in God, the kingdom, and the messenger is there, and they've got God's attention. And that's what this means. They have God's attention. You know, it means, you know, pay attention to little people, to the humble. Pay attention to them, because God pays attention to them through their angels. Or at least if he's not paying direct attention to them, he knows about it. He knows what, you know what I mean? It's saying, it's not so much he's paying attention to them per se, but what it's saying is he knows what's going on down here, and that you despise them. And, you know, in heaven, so to speak, metaphorically or otherwise, it's like there's an angel standing in front of God saying, I've got a case of someone big despising someone small. And the Lord sees it. And the implication is, he's not happy. See that you despise them not. That's what I think that verse is about. I think it's about guardian angels. And fairy tales like that. For the Son of Man has come to save that which is lost. You know what I mean? Like the idea of the little ones, the humble, they're like new in the world. And in a way, I feel like he's saying sort of the greatest in the kingdom is the least in the kingdom. The most humble, the child, the new one. What does greatest mean to be great in the kingdom? He said, whosoever shall do and teach these commandments, they will be called great. He that doesn't will be called least. But, you know, this is a somewhat flexible idea. Jesus speaks about these things from different angles. Another sense of greatness is most important, right? Who's the most important person in the world? Who's the most important person in God's kingdom? If that's the sense in which he took the question, then Jesus takes this little child and says, unless you humble yourself and become as this child, you will no wise enter into the kingdom of heaven. Is that how he phrased it? Except ye be converted, whoever shall humble themselves as this little child is greatest. We become important to God when we cast off our pride. We become great, big, important, consequential. When we are not proud, do not think we are, you know, a malleable person, someone I can work with. There's nothing less important to God than someone who thinks they know everything, and to whom God can no longer add anything because they know the Bible. They know everything about it. They went to school. You know, they know all the systematic theology. Well, you couldn't be less interesting to God. Until you humble yourself and become like a child and say, I don't know anything. But it sure is amazing. I sure want to know stuff. Hey, I got questions. These fools that know not the law. These people, they don't know the scriptures. Hey, and it's true they don't know the scriptures. But don't despise the ones that want to know. You know what I mean? There's a difference. I mean, it's understandable to... I listen to my old studies. I am not very kind to those who like are Christians and they just kind of don't know the scriptures and they don't care. I mean, what kind of, that's not a child. That's, I don't know. That's like it's just a really old person, right? They're not, really old people are not marveling at the world. They're not curious about the world, not usually. They look bored and the world is all wore out and they are weary of the world. That's all the same. And I'm old. You know. So we have to be children. Not in what do you say? In understanding, be men, but in malice, be children. Don't be malicious and wicked like men. Be simple. Like little children, quick to forgive. Hey, everyone knows some bad example of a child, but just we're talking about generalities. A lot of analogies, they don't hold up to intense scrutiny. It's not meant to. When he says as a child, he's focusing on one aspect of being a child. The humble beginning, so to speak. And it does sort of sense of this beginning. Oh, that I could always be in the Word as I was the first year when I was 19, with the same zeal, the same curiosity, the same absolute hunger. And and by doing daily studies, and even my weekly studies when I was doing them, whenever I would do study, it was helpful to my walk, in that it forced me to be hungry, because I got to understand, like the guardian angel verse. I looked at that before I go into the study. I don't consult commentaries. Sometimes I consult them after the fact, because I don't want to hear what people have to say about it. I do want to hear what people have to say about it. But I mean, I want to hear first what the Holy Spirit has to say about it. And that may sound vain, like, well, Paul, it's you. It's like, no, I'm trying to listen. Before the study, I looked at the guardian angel verse, and I just thought, that verse. I don't know what to say about it. I don't know what to say about it. And if there's something else to be said about it, I am curious of what other people might have to say about it. But I already know one thing they say about it, and I think to myself, I don't buy it. I don't buy it. I don't buy that little story. It's too much, smacks like a fairy tale. It doesn't even really match up with the verse well, and it doesn't say a lot. It's like saying, it doesn't. It's not very meaningful. They've got a guardian angel up there. It's watching over them. Well, no. It says they have God's face. The angel has God's attention. God's paying attention to what their angels have to say. So don't despise them. It doesn't sound like guardian angel. It sounds like something else. It's more like tattletale angel. I don't think it means that, though, but I'd gotten off on another subject, sort of, but I'm like, well, what about this verse? For the Son of Man has come to save that which is lost. It follows. Well, as I said, like he comes to believe people that are. What is more, universally like a universal. I don't want to say meme, but from a lost child. Who gets lost more? But children get lost. Go to the store, there's a lost child. I mean, not very often, but they get lost. They get lost. Why? Because they don't know where they're going. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know how to navigate their way through life. And new believers in the faith don't know how to navigate their Christianity. They don't know where they're going, what they're doing. And so often the reaction is, well, come to church and sit here and we will lecture you once a week. And regular church attendance is not a very good way to disciple yourself, honestly. Like when I started when I was 19, I was studying the Bible every single day for 4 hours a day. And that didn't go on forever like that. For one, Then I was 19. I was home on summer from college. Other than my work, I was doing just a job. I didn't have a family. I didn't have any other responsibilities. So instead of sitting around watching TV for 4 hours a day, or whatever it is, also I spent 4 hours a day studying the Bible with the Shepherd's Chapel in Arnold Murray. As bad a teacher as he is. Even the worst teacher can kind of give, it can really give you a lot of, bad teachers can leave you with a lot of baggage, a lot of leaven. But, it is so helpful to have someone who knows the general lay of the land in the Bible take you through it. So I want to teach it all eventually. But I keep going over things I've gone over before. But some things I won't go back to for a long time till I get to stuff in the Old Testament that ought to be gotten to. But a lot of that stuff, like some of the first stuff I read in the Bible was the Old Testament, like the book of Samuel, Genesis. Though it's so helpful to have someone explain or exposit on things like Genesis, there's a lot of exposition that can be made about the stories in Genesis and the meaning of them and the signification of them beyond just the surface of it, but it's not hard reading. Whereas the New Testament and Jesus are kind of hard reading. The prophets are hard reading too. So I focus on the prophets and the New Testament because that's where the hard reading is. The history of Israel and Judah, you can read about it in the book of, you can start with Joshua, then go through Judges, and then go to 1st and 2nd Samuel and the Kings, and you've got the history of Israel and Judah at least through the second captivity. And it's not that hard, and it's kind of interesting. It's not so hard to get through all that. The hard parts to read are, the really hard part is, I remember when I tried to read through the Bible, I got Genesis and then Exodus. Somewhere in Exodus it started getting into a lot of laws, and it got really boring. It ceased being a narrative. It started being like a code of law. That's difficult. Not for the same reason that the New Testament is difficult. It's difficult because it's boring. It's codes of law. It's very difficult to read. I remember having a hard time getting through Leviticus and Numbers. Deuteronomy is a bit more interesting of a read. But you can just read Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings. It's not hard to get through. And people will read Psalms and Proverbs. They're not that hard to read. They're not dense theological, writings. But you can read all that and you're still kind of lost. You're like I don't know what's going on. And I know he means lost like, heaven and hell, sin and destruction, life and death. But he's relating it to the child. Because when you're lost and then you believe in Jesus, you're like a little child. You're like a tiny seed planted in the ground. It's such a minor thing. And who knows what's going to come of it? There's no fruit yet. It's just, I believe. Those little sprouted seeds are very important to God. So he says, woe be to the one by whom the offense comes. It's impossible, but that offenses shall come. But woe to them by whom they come. Verse 12. How think ye, if a man have 100 sheep, and one of them be gone astray, doth he not leave the 99 and go into the mountains and seek that which is gone astray? Again, the most important one is the one most at risk. The new believer has God's attention. The little one who's humble and knows nothing, and know they know nothing especially. Not the one who's old and thinks they know everything, but really knows nothing. It's hard to deal with that. But the one who's vulnerable is the one who has the focus. Which is the greatest sheep of the 100? The 99 that are staying put, or the one that's gone off? That one's the greatest, in the sense of it is the most important. It has his focus. And what do they want of greatness in the kingdom of heaven? What do you suppose? I mean, who would be? God's the greatest in the kingdom. But as long as you're asking what he thinks about it, and these are his thoughts. Which is the greatest? Well, the least, the one that's in danger. That's the one I'm worried about. Okay, we're at 7:30. Let's take a moment to remind you, subscribe to Line by Line Bible Studies. Because on some days, the studies are good. And you wouldn't want to miss that. You can click on the like button, and you should like this study because it is a good one. I'm doing a good job in my own, I wouldn't say humble. I would call it honest opinion. I don't like false humility, where you pretend to be humble, but you're just saying that to seem humble. You can find all these links in the description below. If you have questions, you can send it to that email address, also linked in the description below. Or you can put questions into the chat, which I just looked at, and I see that there's nothing there. It's fine. I checked the email yesterday, but I haven't checked it today. I'll just do that. Fine. I'm just gonna grab it real quick. Let me make sure. Wait, sorry, one more second. Okay. Okay, now. Apologize. Let's see. There we go. Oh, wrong button. There we are. So, back to the study. So that which is lost, that which is, it still belongs to God. The idea is someone who believes in him. But is, because that's what he came for, to save people. And that whosoever should believe on him should not perish, but have everlasting life. God didn't give us faith for us to be lost. So when we have faith, we also have his attention. And often it's funny because you see people, often the greatest confirmation, especially someone who's converted as an adult, comes in the early time of their conversion. Like my wife, when she first believed, she had her most memorable experiences where God interacted, where God confirmed his presence in her life. Me, it was different. I was always a believer. And it was only after my faith had almost been, destroyed over many years of just struggling and stuff. It was only at the point where I was at a low ebb and ready to give up. But also that I had rekindled my desire. I stopped being like a know-it-all. I realized that there was so much more to know that I wanted to know. That had to do not with like what's up here. It is up here though. But I mean about the kind of knowledge you could get in a book. Though people write books about it. They write books. I tried reading books. How to overcome this, how to straighten that out. All kinds of psychological books. But until you go, some things don't come out that way. Like the lunatic spirit. Only by prayer and maybe fasting. Only by God's intercession. Only by his intervention. And when we turn to him in that way, it can't be that he will respond. Verse 13, and if so be that he find it, verily I say unto you, he rejoiceth more of that sheep than of the 99 which went not astray. And we have this idea often. We think of this as people going astray, wandering away from the faith. But I think of it in terms of just like, not necessarily that people have wandered away from the faith, because that's not good, right? But in a sense, we are astray already. Outside of the faith, we are astray. We are like stray sheep. If we be God's chosen, if he has called us to salvation, he goes forth, he looks, and he finds us. Notice he doesn't stay there with the 99 and wait for the stray sheep to come back. I mean, look at this analogy. I mean, I know, like I say often, all analogies don't have to be broken down to their constituent parts. And it's like, well, this, that, the other. Every parable does not have to be explained in the minutiae. But I see something here in this as far as he has 100 sheep, and one of them is be gone astray. I don't think he's referring to someone who's like a believer and then they go off. I think of this in turn. I mean, you could and that's believers go astray as far as they may sin. I mean, I could look at my youth as a process of going astray. I mean, I loved the Lord. I never stopped believing in him. But I kind of went off and did my worldly thing. I was seduced by the thorns and the briars. I don't know if it was the deceitfulness of riches, but the pleasures of the flesh, no doubt. And in that, I eventually was drawn back to the Lord. But but I was always his. But also I look at my wife and her life, and she was always his. She was always his, because we are his from the foundation of the world, by his election. We are chosen of him. He is not our elect. We are his elect. He chooses us. He calls us. He gives us the eyes and the ears to see, so that when he calls, we answer. So when she was astray, God went looking for her. He went out and went looking like a shepherd would go looking for a lost sheep. He sought her out. The Lord adds to the church such as should be saved. It's not a, because the analogy would be more like this, like the kingdom of heaven is like a shopkeeper who had a big sale, who wanted to give away all his goods. So he erected a balloon. He put giant balloons outside of his store, and a big sign that said, "Sale, everything's free." And all the people who saw it, some saw it and despised him because they said his goods are not good. And some said, "I'm too busy and it looks like a gimmick to me." And some said, whatever. And then but some said, "Wow, free stuff, that's for us." And they came in and they took all they wanted. That's not, I mean, that's how they preach it in church. Isn't it? That's exactly how they preach it. So, Even so, it is not the will of your Father which is in heaven that one of these little ones should perish. Again, context is important. And the whole New Testament context is so important because it leads to so much incorrect thinking about New Testament things and God. Now, Jesus is very harsh in most of his... Listen to the things he's been teaching. And we're going to see. He is he presents a very stark picture. Some of his parables are absolutely brutal. And then they'll say, but he loves everybody and he doesn't want anyone to perish. It's not anyone. These little ones refers to the little ones that believe in him. These little ones, my chosen. Like in the book of Peter. That's first or second. God is long-suffering to usward, not willing that any should perish. Us, it means all humanity. Wrong. It wasn't talking about all humanity, but that's how it's interpreted. God who will have all men to be saved. Every individual human being? Wrong. No, all men, Jews and Greeks, male and female, rich and poor, great and small, from all walks of life. There's no type of man which God does not wish to save. But that is a far cry. Meaning God is no longer discriminating, saying Israel are my people and these are not. The rest are not my people. He brought together the two into one new man. That's one of the big themes of the New Testament. They're like, the Gentiles are welcome. God wants all men, not just the Jews. That was the message. And today it's been corrupted into God wants everybody, even people he hates. Because he doesn't hate anybody. No, he loves everybody. Even though the Bible just clearly says, God says in Romans 9, I hated Jacob have I loved, Esau have I hated. And it moreover stipulates that it had nothing to do with anything they had ever done, that while they were in the womb before, neither having done any good or evil, he'd already determined this. So of those 100 sheep, so to speak, the 100% of his elect, not the 100% of mankind, but the 100% of mankind which belonged to him by his determinate counsel and foreknowledge, of those 100%, he is not willing that even one of them should perish. So he will move heaven and hell to get at them and make sure they don't. That's the message. He doesn't want any of his little ones to perish, because his little ones are all humble. They all do these things. They're all, in a sense, he's saying, who's the greatest? You know, if you don't become like this, you won't enter the kingdom. Here's the greatest. You know, the thing that has my focus. He's like, I'm not focused on people being great. I'm focused on people, not on my people, that they should not perish. Like I said, it is not meet to give the children's food to dogs. And that's harsh. And then you think in the next chapter he's going to be like, and God loves everybody. Not that that woman, he's expressing his attitude that you are outside. You're outside of God's will. But faith brought her into God's will. I mean, but because she had faith, she was manifest as being within. And that she could receive the blessing of Christ, that she could have something to do with him through faith. What's going on? Oh, whatever. Let's get some giant vehicle outside somewhere making a lot of noise. Verse 15. Moreover, if thy brother shall trespass against thee, go and tell him his fault between thee and him alone. If he shall hear thee, thou hast gained thy brother. But if he will not hear thee, take with thee one or two more, that in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. It's part of the law. And if he shall neglect to hear thee, tell it to the church. Oh, I know what it is. They trimmed the trees yesterday, and now the branches are out there, and there's a chipper out there, and they're chipping it all and making wood chips. All right, every word may be established. And if he shall neglect to hear them, tell it to the church. And if he neglect to hear the church, let him be unto thee as a heathen man and as a publican. Now the word church, it's funny, he already mentioned it once, and you think about it. You know, Jesus still goes into synagogues, he's, you know. The word church in Greek is ecclesia. He already mentioned it. On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I believe that was the first mention. I will build my church on this rock, and etc. I didn't really discuss the idea of, well, what, Paul, you just pull out this word out of nowhere. What is a church? We all think we know, right? What is a church? It's got a steeple, or no, maybe it's in a warehouse. Oh, no, maybe it's in a stadium. Maybe it's none of the above. Ecclesia. Ecclesia. Ek is out in Greek. Ecclesia is called. It means called out. It refers to any sort of chosen assembly. An assembly of chosen men is an ecclesia. As opposed to synagogue, synagogue, it means a gathering together. There's a called out and a gathering together. So very different ideas. It implies a sort of an elite assembly. That's what it means. It's not the, you know, it often refers in English obviously to the building and to the service and to the pastor and to the whatever. But what it means is, in the New Testament, it is the assembly of the saints. Regardless of whether or not they are assembled, they are the assembly of the saints. Like in a metaphorical sense, they are, you know, like I have a church. My church has never gotten together because, you know, ultimately the Christians believe that the church is the, as they call, many-membered body of Christ. It is made up of all believers everywhere. That is the church. The Catholic Church calls itself Catholic because church was understood as a universal concept. And they call themselves the Catholic Church because, well, it was Roman Catholic. It became Roman Catholic. But it was Catholic original because it was just small c Catholic, meaning it was universal. Capital C, it's just a title. It still means that to them, but it's not true in fact, is it? The universal church is, it may include bishops and deacons and pastors and teachers and prophets and people and the people who have other gifts and just the general assembly of believers. It may include, well, actually, I want to focus. It may include bishops and cardinals. Like literally, Catholic bishops and cardinals may be part of the church. But just because a man is a bishop or a cardinal does not mean he is or has anything to do with the true church. Because it is ultimately the called out assembly. It is the 100 sheep. All 100. 100%. And because God came to seek and save that which is lost. He didn't just come for, you know, I can't. I was gonna sort of use myself in a degrading way, like talk about my occupation, but it's like actually my occupation sounds too highfalutin. So, humble shepherds. It's not just humble goat herders and farmers. I'm not a farmer, though I think that is very sort of whatever. For some people that's kind of a high calling. It's not any small thing. A farmer today is not a farmer of yesteryear. If you're a farmer today, you have quite an operation. You might be part of a co-op and all that, but I mean, it is not a small endeavor to modern farm. Unless you're a subsistence farmer in sub-Saharan Africa, yeah, that's a humble occupation, indeed. So that is the church. Okay. Stupid little pop-ups of notifications. But if you neglect to hear the church, let him be unto thee as a heathen man and a publican. So, you don't have to necessarily go to the whole church, but what he's saying is like tell the General Assembly, maybe your local. See, and the church as we know it is sort of the local manifestation of that general, holy, overarching big church. That's what the local assembly is about. It is a small version of the big church. The big church is known to God. It's the most reliable church in the sense that it has no structure on earth. It may include bishops and stuff. I know not. I don't know the whole role of membership. I doubt it contains many, to tell you the truth. But I don't know. I try not to be so dark and judgmental as I used to be. Whatever. It's not up to me. Judge nothing before the time. I've often thought, like, would a unlikely, if God was to choose someone unlikely in the end times, like, to be Elijah, would it be some humble person, or would it be maybe, like a Benny Hinn, like someone who would be so despised on a certain level? You take someone who's so despised and turn him around. And so for some people, it's like, what do you mean? Benny Hinn's the greatest. And if you don't know who he is, he's the television, slaying the spirit, fake healing guy. Not that I don't think there's any healing going on. No. My grandmother used to tell a story about who was it? Some famous woman who was like a tent revivalist came through town, and they're back in Iowa, and some relation of mine was offered a wheelchair, and then they brought her up and they got her to get out of the wheelchair, but she walked in. I mean, she's dancing around, and like she got into it, but it was a farce. People willingly participate in the farce. It's not the kind of thing you admit. I have pain. I do too. Sometimes it goes away when I'm distracted by better things. I don't know. All right, and verse. I'm not done with that little section. I'm going to talk about it. Verily I say unto you, whatsoever you shall bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, whatsoever you shall loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Again I say unto you, if two of you shall agree upon anything that they shall ask, it shall be done for them from my Father which is in heaven. I think I'll pick it up there. It is related. So let's talk about this a little bit before we finish. If thy brother shall trespass against thee, go and tell him his fault between thee and him alone. This is sort of the thing I've always followed in my life. And people Well, always, not quite, okay? And certainly in my person-to-person, when I have a problem with somebody, I've tried to apply this verse. You know what I mean? Especially a fellow believer. With an unbeliever, it's telling the church isn't going to do you any good. Unless you live in in the Middle Ages where the church was, everybody was part of the church, whether they wanted to be or not. You know, I mean, when it comes to problems between believers, this is the protocol. Go tell them yourself. And don't start talking, oh, brother so-and-so, I've got a problem with him, blah, 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 blah. Don't start talking to other people first. First, tell them. Give them an opportunity to do the right thing, to repent or just listen, whatever. Tell him his fault between you and him alone. The process of me leaving Spirit of Truth Church basically took this form. I had a problem with my brother, the pastor. I wrote him a letter. And you can see on my website it had something to do with the timeline of John. The Gospel of John. Because one of the things in that church that I think the ministry got hung up on was this idea that the ministry of Jesus was 1 year. And only 1 year. Not to say like I did that in the Gospel of Matthew, there's no... It seems like just this very short period of time. A matter of months. Because there are no time factors given. It's just Jesus talking. I mean, he could have done this whole thing in a day. I mean, not quite, but you know what I'm saying? But like it's the... I mean, in the 18 chapters we've done, we've had no sense of anything except going from here to there. We know that some time must have passed. But it certainly doesn't feel like years. Because of the way the book is constructed. Well, I show in this letter I wrote... And I don't know where you find it on my website. It's probably under doctrine, under writings, stuff like that, okay? It's not going to be a studies page. Or is it? Oh, sorry. Or is it? Where does one find this? I'm guessing doctrine because it does not seem... doctrinal writing? Where's doctrinal writing? You know, it's funny. Someone told me I gotta answer emails. I get a stack of emails from my website, not from this. But yeah, I have no idea. Oh, maybe it's under questions. Yeah, I think so. If you go to the page, the link for questions, there's a shredder. So, wow, I have no idea where it is. God, talk to me. Sorry, this is really getting boring, isn't it? Yeah, whatever. It was something like time factors in the Gospel of John. What a waste of time that was. It can be found on my website. Someone wrote me about it. So it had to do with me leaving the church. I wrote him this letter. Never got a response. Never any kind of response like I hear you, but I disagree. Nothing. Nothing. Eventually, later on, it came and there was an issue. I took it to him with another brother. I hadn't gotten any agreement from the other brother first, but I had someone bear witness to what I was trying to do. And then I left that church. And then years later, I told it to the world, the church at large. I told my problem. I never regarded him as a heathen man and a publican. But much as a heathen man and a publican, I didn't have anything to do with them afterwards. So maybe that's in a sense. It doesn't mean you despise them. You know what I'm saying? You don't despise them. But for the Jews, publicans and heathen, they had nothing to do with them. Now, Jesus would go and eat with the publicans and sinners. But it was generally not the idea that he did that offended the Pharisees. But it's not that he was consistently in their company, like entering into their lives. Like, I mean, Jesus wasn't going to raves every weekend or something like that, and participating in their world and lifestyle. I mean, he didn't hang out with prostitutes just like they're a bunch of prostitutes. We hang out and whatever. It's not like that at all. He preached to them. He would dine with them, but it is not something that was like just that's what he did. He dined with those people. He dined with his people, with the people who followed him. So he might go to a gathering of publicans and preach the gospel, and if they should follow him, then good. But if not, he wasn't waiting around for them. He was moving on. So there have been times, though, when I have not followed this protocol. And that was when it comes to Arnold Murray. I never went to him by myself and told him my problem with him. Like I never bothered. I went straight to the public, and here's why. And I think it's a very good reason why. He'd already had people telling him his doctrines were wrong for years. You know what I mean? It was already at the stage where the church knew. You know what I mean? It was not. It wasn't like I was the first person to question this beloved teacher. You can't take something in a vacuum and say, oh, well, you didn't tell him personally. It's like thousands of people told him personally, or hundreds or dozens, whatever. I'll say dozens for sure. Dozens of people attempted communication with him to discuss doctrine, and he either refused the communication, ignored the communication, or was critical of the communication. He did not accept any of their criticism. He did not accept any of their rebuke. And when someone refused to accept the chastisement, and then others, they already had all the chastisement. There's nothing for me to come along and say, like, well, here's my take on it. I was also a student of his. I am another witness. It's not like he was, like we're living in the Middle Ages. It's not like I was being Martin Luther. And even that is like he's talking about the church itself. It's not like he was like the most beloved Christian teacher in the world, whom everyone loved and whose doctrine everyone accepted, and who was universally extolled as the most virtuous person ever. And then I just start saying things about him publicly negative. And again, I never spoke against him personally, only about the things he taught publicly. And yes, about the way he taught them. Because he did that in front of everybody. When someone uses abusive, like if someone's being abusive in front of everybody, and misbehaving in front of everybody, it's like there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, that's the way they're behaving is wrong. That is wrong. I mean, if they're not ashamed of behaving like that in front of everybody, why should I have to like write them a secret letter and wait for, how long do I have to wait for the response before I get to go tell someone else? Arnold Murray never sinned against me. I had nothing against him personally. There was no trespass against me. That's another thing. If thy brother trespass against thee. In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul, on several occasions, would name people who were teaching false doctrine. He mentioned them by name. And the only people who desire to create some sort of doctrine out of nothing, that one should never name false teachers, or one that should never talk against any pastor, the only person with any motivation to say that is someone who's teaching things falsely and has some sense that they know it. Because why else? Why else would you want to say that? Because people who live in glass houses usually understand that they shouldn't throw bricks. You know? If you live in if you know you're guilty of something, or fear let's say this. Not that you know you're guilty, okay? I don't think Arnold Murray taught wrong intentionally. But he knew this, that he could be called, that he knew his doctrines were unusual, and that he could be criticized for it. And so he chose to say that, well, because in order to sort of take the teeth out of any criticism, one might level at him, he taught that it was sinful or wrong to name anybody when you criticize them, especially pastors and teachers. You should never call them out by name, ever. I mean, there was, and so he, except for one occasion, which if anyone who has studied with him long enough knew about, it pays to obfuscate, the article. There's an article he read once called "It Pays to Obfuscate," and in that he did name someone. And the guy's name was on the article, okay? But he generally taught in generalities, and it's kind of a cheap thing too, because when people talk about like the rapture, I don't need to mention people because it's so widespread. But when it comes to the Shepherd's Chapel and Arnold Murray, if you don't mention their names, people are going to be, what are you talking about? Though those doctrines have become, they're the Anglo-Israelism, all the little elements of his teaching are definitely more widely known now than they were when I encountered them in the early 90s. Because you can find all over YouTube false teachers who are in the same vein. So anyways. So we'll pick up with verse 18 tomorrow. And I suppose I would, that of this, what you make binding, it can apply to this 16, 17. 15, 16, 17. A brother, when the church rebukes a brother, the church can make a binding punishment if they're in the right. Sometimes the church is wrong. Not the true church, but sometimes, whatever. That's kind of stupid. What is the true church? People make mistakes. Because I immediately thought of good old Martin Luther. There was something wrong with the Catholic Church. But it was an earthly church. Well, the earthly church and the earthly things we do can be outside the will of God. So we'll talk about that tomorrow. We're almost 10 minutes over. So thanks for joining me in the study today. I look forward to studying with you again tomorrow. Here we go.
I have more understanding than all my teachers, for thy testimony is on my meditation. I understand more than the ancients, because I keep thy precepts.